Welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. All right, welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast. I am here today celebrating our 100th episode with Wally Olson, my good friend who has been only wonderful to me over the years, shared his knowledge with me and lots of others through this podcast. So, Wally, welcome to the podcast.
I am thrilled to be here.
Good. Well, I'm thrilled to have you. We are going to reminisce a little today about our good friend Bob Metzger. And if I had one way to describe Bob Metzger, it would be, man, a life well lived. And I'll start with a little bit of background. Bob's been on the podcast multiple times. Bob's been on webinars with us. We've done a lot of stuff with Bob. I wish we had done more. We had about 10 episodes in the tank that we were going to record that we didn't get to. Bob Metzger, like me, likes to drive fast. And whenever you were going somewhere with Bob, he'd always offer to drive. And if I told him I was going to drive, he'd say, well, you're going to put your foot down or you're going to dilly-dally. And so when you were going someplace with Bob, you drove fast because that's how he liked to get to things. For background, Bob died on the last Sunday of October, which I think was like the 30th or the 28th or, somewhere right there at the end of the month. And I hit a deer going down the highway. He used to drive from his house where he lived in Paris, Texas, up to the ranch in Hugo, Oklahoma, and highlighted a few things for us. And I wanted to get Wally on and reminisce about the things we learned from Bob and our relationship with him. And I think one of the things that Bob teaches us over and over again is that the comment Wally makes about this being a relationship business and the cattle business is all about relationships is highlighted by our, now multiple decade association with Bob. So, Wally, jump in here. What do you want to share? What do we want to know from Bob Metzger's life?
The number one thing to know from Bob Metzger, he was a dear friend, but he was a tremendous money manager.
Yes, he was.
He understood how to manage money, and that's the best thing I learned from him. We did business together for 20 years, handling cattle. We had fun. I'm going to really miss him. But understanding management of money and how to take risks, but to mitigate the risks that you're taking and understand the value of compounding. Delayed gratification is such an important thing to be very successful. Now, also, we've been in a number of deals that didn't quite work out as we planned. Like we said, it was a good idea at the time, but the thing was, is we understood that you needed to go into deals with large margins so you could handle the glitches that come along. And we also did lots of little things. We did not just have a great big shipping day and ship 10 loads of cattle. One day we had, we tried to ship a load of cattle a month, and it was very good cash flow and turnover. And the biggest advantage that Bob and I think, reason we did it, one is we only had one set goal, and that was to be profitable. There was no other, whether we were running the best black steers or whatever. It was just we're going to be profitable. We're going to be transparent, and we're going to be honest, beyond doubt, and we were going to get people paid. And it just worked out well. What it did for both of us is it gave us a lot more diversity in our investments. I mean, just in different sets of cattle. You can get the load of cattle from, and I've had them, and boy, they're devastating. But if you only own half of them, it isn't quite as devastating.
Misery loves company, right?
And we just were able to, we got along very well. And the only problem, with Bob Metzger is the only thing that really upset him is if you didn't return his phone calls. The rest, we could go through some real big wrecks, but as long as we were working our way through it, it was fine with him.
The one other thing that would get him hot would be when technology didn't work on his silly iPad thing. Man, when he couldn't get his phone or his iPad to work, that would drive him nuts. So pretty funny.
Yes, it was.
Very good. Well, Bob Metzger was an interesting guy. Bob's family actually had done quite well while he was a child, and he described a number of times. He was born in Midland and spent part of his childhood there, and then his family bought the ranch in Hugo, which is southeast Oklahoma. I think while he was a kid of some kind. I think he was a teenager. Is kind of the impression I've got. But he moved out there and continued to build what his family had started. And interesting to me, Bob, as you mentioned, he really believed in that power of compounding and had a real desire to have his money working for him. And because of that, he didn't have a lot of interest in things that, I think of as extraneous to generating cash flow. So he didn't need to drive a fancy car. He didn't need to own the fanciest house. He had a beautiful ranch there in southeast Oklahoma with a wonderful house up on the hill, but it would never have given you an idea of what Bob was worth. Is that a fair description?
That would be very fair.
And I think one of the greatest jokes between all of us is him driving Doris's old Toyota Camry with 400,000 miles on it about anywhere he went, right?
That's correct. When my wife traded cars, Bob Metzger wanted it, and he got it, and he drove it and drove it and drove it and drove
Yep.
it.
And I've said multiple times when I've really made it, I want to own a Toyota Camry. That's gonna be the sign that we are on the home stretch.
I understand.
Very good.
And one thing, well, one of the biggest things that helped Bob and I get along, we both, like we said, we were going to be profitable, and we didn't have any need to be in control. We were just very good. We would bounce things off of each other, and it would keep us out of bad deals. I mean, it was just amazing how well that helped us out.
Yeah, so you really did, and I noticed it always when being involved with the two of you. You really did leverage the power of the team. Bob brought a very rich skill set to the table, and so did you. And when the two of you were together, it's interesting to hear two people that I think of as knowing everything, talking to each other, challenging each other, and then saying, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." And that's a great example of how we should be thinking in our lives and how we should be surrounding those people with, or surrounding ourselves with those people that will challenge our thoughts and ask good questions and not necessarily be overly contentious, but, just push us to be better, right?
That's correct. You only want to be with people smarter than you. So, and I give Bob Metzger credit for being smarter than I in some areas. I know my friend that's passed away, Chip Hines, always said, everybody knows something that you don't know that you need to find out from them. So that's the deal with networking and just learning from each other, and just tremendous.
Bob and I used to talk very regularly, not quite every day, but pretty close. I was always amazed when he would call me and ask about investing advice, like, what do you think about this company? And it's like, Bob, what, why are you asking me this? Like, you're the one that knows all this stuff, but he wanted to talk it through. You know what I mean? And he wanted an ear, even if it was a somewhat ignorant one, to like think through the challenge. Like, what does this look like 5 years from now? Again, he baffled me sometimes with his degree of humility. What do you think? And I'm like, what do you mean? What do I think? I want to know what you think. That's the only answer that matters. So anyway, just interesting how those things would happen.
That's correct.
Bob also was interested in constant improvement, and I think that's one of the reasons why he surrounded himself with the people he did. But whether it was, riding his bike, which he liked to ride his bike fast too, or learning how to work with cattle or learning how to market cattle, like he was a guy who'd been tremendously successful and was always interested in being better. He never had the idea that he'd arrived.
And that comes back from both him and I knowing Bud Williams, and Bud Williams' deal. Every day you need to be better. You may go ahead a quarter of an inch, or you may go 10 feet, but you always want to be better. And I think we both only competed with ourselves. Him and I didn't compete with each other, or it was with ourselves that we did it. And that was, that's one thing that made us work so well, I think.
Yeah. And that continual drive for improvement it's kind of funny, but it can almost become kind of addictive, right? Where it's like, it's a fun game.
Yes. And it also, And you got to be cautious so it doesn't eat you up. You've just got to, understand that you're going forward, and some days you aren't going to go very far, and then all of a sudden you'll just hit a lick and shazam.
Yeah. And I know you guys had quite a number of deals that went quite well, and I know you had quite a few that didn't go nearly as well. So all of those were learning experiences along the way, right?
That's correct. And we both believed in, when we went into deals, we were looking at return on our money. We had margin in the deals. We didn't do stuff just to fill a paste or whatever. It had to have a margin there so we could have a little wreck and live through it.
Yep. Very good. 100 episodes. When we started Ranchonomics, I hoped it would help a few ranchers, and especially our clients, think differently about their operation. And man, what it's become means more to me than I could put into words. Thank you for listening, for sharing, for subscribing, and for trusting us with your business and, most importantly, your time. To celebrate, we're giving away a free registration to the 2027 Ranch Right Retreat, which is going to be held February 15th through the 18th in Orange Beach, Alabama. All you have to do is sign up for our email list. The link is in the show notes. That's all it takes to be entered. Thank you again for listening, and here's to 100 more. Now, I think for all of the things that we learned from Bob by his good example, we've also had the opportunity to learn in his death from maybe where he hasn't been such a good example. Do we want to talk about that just a little?
Well, he was the Monday after the Sunday that he hit the deer, he was going to go to work on his will, which he didn't have. And I think they're getting it worked out, but you need to take, I was shocked when I found out he didn't have one, for knowing how he, ran his business and the many things he had going on.
And Bob's kids are grown, and he was divorced, and there were people that kind of depended on Bob, but he didn't have, for example, a wife home with kids that depended on him, and that sort of thing. But even still, that's we know as his kids were grieving his death, as you and I were grieving his death, and as we're working through unwinding everything, there's certainly friends that can help and that sort of thing, but it is a hard place to put other people in, to sort of have to wrap those things up while at the same time, dealing with loss, right?
One of the big things, fortunately for him, because neither one of us were really good at dotting I's and crossing T's. We just loved the deal. But fortunately, in the last couple of years, we came up with a document that stated how things, with the demise of either one of us, how we unraveled it, who we called, just like his son. That Sunday morning, I got a call and it popped up on my caller ID that it was his son. And I told my wife, this is not going to be good. And it wasn't. And we had, I don't know, $500,000 worth of cattle scattered around between the two of us, and it was just about 5 phone calls. And, we proceeded to start unwinding it. We had the documents to show the bankers and people involved. And it's, like you said, it's about over with. You've got a few steers to get rid of. And, it was very simple and very easy, because we were prepared.
It's actually become a positive factor in some of the partnership deals we're in, and we've talked explicitly about this before Bob died and more since. But if something happens where our families are kind of intertwined and we're friends and we care about each other and we do business together, like those are places where, if we need to, we can work our way out of those things, and our family isn't saddled with that, sort of suddenly without any prior information.
And like I said, it was, one thing too, that, we're both adamant on getting our bills paid. So, there's nothing out there 60 or 90 days and stuff. So, and one thing, if you're going to, work like Bob and I did, you need to have a document stating that this is an undivided interest. No partnership is created. And you also need to understand that, somebody's the lead dog or the boss. And in case of selling cattle, I was the one that I sold cattle, and Bob didn't like it. That was tough. I mean, well, it wasn't that way. I mean, we communicated, but you got to have somebody out there to make the decisions. This is a committee deal, but you got to, one person has got to make the decisions.
Yep. And look, the danger of a 50-50 partner, the biggest danger is that you freeze, right? And we've talked over and over again about the most important thing you don't want to do is freeze. And if you're divided, should we sell this week? Should we sell in a month? Like 50-50, you can't make a decision. So that joint venture agreement spells out clearly, like, there is a decision maker in the event of a disagreement. Now we strive for consensus, but if we don't get it, somebody makes a decision so that a decision can be made. And look, if you don't like the way the decisions are going, don't continue the joint venture.
That's correct. One thing, we always had exit times. And since we grazed lots of cattle in the Flint Hills, on August the 1st, we usually tried to have the whole Olson Metzger venture cleaned out. And that was to make sure there isn't some, if you're trading cattle all the time, it's hard to keep track of your inventory.
I've heard that some people have trouble tracking their inventory. That's interesting.
Well, number one that can't track it. I don't do it anymore. So.
Thank goodness, says Walter.
Yeah, thank goodness. I mean, the month of December is when I have to try to figure out my inventory.
That's when you have to confess to Walter all the bad things you've done.
So that's just part of life. But one thing I want to really emphasize, I'm a big believer in working with people and joint ventures, but be really careful about not getting into partnerships with people. You got to have documents, and depending on the lawyers, this document we have was lawyered, but it still, it could go to a court of law and they try to break it. So number one, you need to deal with very good people. That's the secret to this, is to make sure you're dealing with good people. And if you're going to deal with good people, you're probably going to have to pay for it, And my deal is if somebody's taking care of a set of cattle for you or something, and it's too cheap or too good to be true, you are in trouble. You need to know what good costs are and make sure that, that you stay away from it, because the way they're going to make up for doing it cheap is to cheat you.
Yeah. They're going to cut a corner somewhere and it's going to come back and bite you.
That's correct.
Yep. Good. All right. Well, the last thing I want to talk about with Bob is Bob was incredibly generous, as are you, and has been willing to. I know of people all around the country that Bob talked to, and sometimes it was about cattle, and sometimes it was about money management, and sometimes it was, specifics of investment advice or investment strategy. Bob always was incredibly humble, and I'm continually amazed that he would call me and ask me about investment decisions and want to know my opinion. And I'd be thinking, well, you know way more about this than I do. But boy, was he willing to also just talk to people and help them get started, help them get going.
Yep. And one thing he loved to do, which I love to do, is help young people out. We never did come up with a real successful, but being able to have, people to invest in a cattle deal, and they could invest 5-10%, whatever, and Bob and I would pick up the rest. And we needed to they worked, but they didn't work well. We could have kept working at it, and it would have worked out. But this gives us something to live for.
Some fun was had along the way, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. Very good. Well, I thank you for joining me on this. Is there anything else we should talk about with regards to Bob? Because I know he had a huge impact in our life and left a huge hole when he died.
Like I said, every morning at 6:30, that's when he was driving up to the ranch to feed. He would usually call me, and I think about that a lot.
And it's amazing when we lose somebody like that in our life.
And it comes quick, so be prepared.
Comes quick, and again, Bob was a healthy guy. This was an accident, and we know of far too many people that have accidents in our business and are, gone very unexpectedly. I think it's very important to be prepared for that, because we never know when our time is coming, and I don't think we could ever be ready enough. And especially if we have dependent kids and, a spouse, people that rely on us and the income we produce and the work we get done for their survival, I think we need to be very careful that we are properly prepared for that possibility, because it's not a theoretical thing. Like, it's going to happen to all of us at some point or another. So we need to be ready.
That is an absolute fact. You can come to my funeral, I can go to yours, and that's that.
But it's going to be one or the other.
Yeah, unless we go together.
Yeah, well, Wally, I'm thankful to you for, I think you're the one that introduced me to Bob. And I'm sure thankful for that introduction. I'm thankful for your constant reminder that this is a relationship business. This is a people business.
Now, one thing I would like to say to people is get out there. There's many people have helped me, and you just got to ask sometime, and just ask. If they say no, it's not a big deal. Like I say, if you're going to be successful in this world, you got to have, if you're going to get a date with the prom queen, you got to ask. And when she turns you down, there's always somebody else. So.
Yep. I think about that every time I see my prom queen. So you have to ask. But the saddest part for me of being married is you don't get to ask girls out. That's the funnest part of it. Just the asking.
You can go over to the house and ask Britt out.
My chances have gone way down, though, since the initial. I'll just say 3 kids later, and that she might be rethinking her decision. So
I understand.
Anyway, well, Wally, thank you again. I'm thankful for your generosity. I'm thankful for all the wonderful mentors I've had that have helped me, come this far. And it's pretty exciting to see how things turn out. So it's amazing what happens as time ticks forward, and it goes forward one way or the other. And I think as we think about somebody like Bob, we can either be compounding our time and compounding our money, compounding our knowledge, or not. And boy, life is sure better when we're in the compounding phase. So thanks, Wally, for joining us. We will talk again soon. Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.